Hello, everybody. How are you guys doing today? A special guest today is Dr. Jim Segala, and we'll be going over his Mupas device. And a quick background on Dr. Jim. He has over 30 years of experience in the scientific and engineering fields, building complex experimental systems. He holds a Ph.D. in physics and advanced degrees in engineering. And my personal favorite, for over 11 years, Dr. Jim Segala was in active research at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin, where he performed experiments on radiobiology, quantum entanglement, quantum optics, vacuum polarization, and neurobiology. He's also appeared as an expert on subject matter on Skinwalker Ranch. And I believe you've also recently done a recording with National Geographic and the Discovery Channel.
Yeah, yeah. So just recently, or about 6 months ago, they were very interested in understanding what kind of instrumentation is available to help experiencers and people that see a lot of UFOs, so they can actually figure out what's going on in their environment. So they actually came to my house and they spent 3 or 4 days here with their film crew, and the show is actually under Leslie Kean, and it's going to be filmed, or it's going to be actually shown on Hulu, which is of course, a Disney channel. So if you want to watch it, it's a National Geographic show, but it'll be available through Hulu. And it airs in just a few, it airs on the 9th of January, and it's probably, I think it's like 8 episodes. So it's a going to be a long running show.
That's very exciting. And so you've been designing the MovePass device, but did that original design start while you were in Austin, Texas at the the Institute for Advanced Studies over there, or?
It actually did. It happened. So I started working with Hal Puthoff at the Institute back in 2011. And during that time, there was a lot of, and my background is biological physics and how energy affects the human body and specifically the neurological processes that we have. So I was put on a team with a physician who was a um, a forensic neurologist, basically, somebody that can understand what's going on after the fact. And we were asked to investigate some of the injuries that were happening while people are experiencing, say, UFO contacts, or you're just having an experience. It's on a place like Skinwalker Ranch or Blind Frog Ranch, or these places that are known for very strange phenomena. And there were a lot of injuries that were resulting from that. And I was put on a team to go investigate to figure out why this is actually happening. Now, you have to understand the situation. People would have, not have anything happening in their lives. They would go to these properties and all of a sudden they would have, very, very bad headaches, or they would have nosebleeds, they would have catatonia, or they would, something would happen to them. And then for months and months afterwards, they would have these residual effects, or these effects that they just couldn't get rid of. And then they would contact their doctor. The doctor would throw their hands up and says, "I don't know what's wrong with you, but we're just going to treat it like, maybe an infection or something like that." So maybe over 100 of these types of injuries were reported, and Hal was always sent this information, Hal's Institute. And he finally said, "Well, why don't you guys go figure out what the hell's going on?" So we went out, we interviewed a lot of people, looked at the medical reports, had some scans done that were above and beyond what they already had done. And what we found out is that when these people were in the environment of having some phenomena around them, they were in fact getting some kind of energy entering their bodies. And we actually have medical evidence pointing to this, where then they would induce some type of experience. They would hallucinate, or they would see things. They would go in, catatonic. Like, in other words, they would go like lose like 2 or 3 hours, and they would come out of it and say, whatever happened. So a lot of this stuff was categorized, and it was great because we had a lot of medical data. So always very good scientific data always came out of when you have instruments that you can count on. We found out that something in the environment was inducing these injuries. It wasn't something they were manifesting within their body. So we said, okay, well, if that's the case, if the stuff is coming from the outside going into their body to induce this, can we capture it with a piece of equipment that we can put near their body or on their person, that would be monitoring them 24/7, looking for any spurious type of signals that was above and beyond what you would expect to have, like from a microwave or a cell phone, or just from the antennas outside. And in fact, we spent 3 years in a study doing this. This started maybe like 2017. We finished it up in about 2020, and we collected terabytes worth of data. And we also asked the people, they says, we would like to know what's going on in your everyday life. We want to know, what are you experiencing? Are you seeing anything? Are you photographing anything? What kind of phenomena are you actually interacting with? So we gathered all that. So we had thousands of these types of interactions with some phenomena. We still didn't know what it was. But then on top of that, we had the environmental signals correlated with these things, with these events. There were these narrative events that allows us to collect some really good data. And we had some amazing data that came out of it. So that's how it all started. And then, of course, the evolutionary process. The first piece of equipment that we designed was rudimentary, didn't really work very well. But as the years went by, we got better and better at it, miniaturized it, made it, we said, well, wait a minute now, we can't just have something that's sitting there in your desk. We need to also have something that you can walk around with. So, we also did a something that was all personal that they can carry with them, like a watch. So, like I said, it was an evolutionary process, and now how many years later? So it's, almost it's coming up on maybe 8 years later. We've got some pretty sophisticated equipment that we send to people. Now we have, almost 100 people now in the study that are signing up, and we have people signing up every day to get involved in the study, and it's amazing.
So two things to those points. So at this point, though, the study has been going for about since 2017. We're in 2024, so about 7 years or
Yeah,
2025 now. Sorry, how many
2025. Yeah,
years?
so 8 year. Yeah,
Yeah. The question that comes to mind is energy. The word energy itself is a very it's an obvious word, many people know, but it's essentially the potential to do work. There's all kinds of different energy, right? You have potential energy, you have
yep,
kinetic energy, you have energy associated with electromagnetic waves, like I believe it's E equals H mu, something of that nature. Energy associated with sound waves. And so
sure.
when you're designing this device, what type of energies are you specifically looking for?
Well, so energy enters your body in specific ways. I mean, so what you're looking at is looking at the common ones, like the electromagnetic fields, right? That are all around us because of our cell phones, because of the high tension wires, and all that kind of stuff, satellites, all that kind of thing. So we're measuring that continuously over all bands. I mean, like the electromagnetic spectrum is enormous. It goes from very, very large wavelengths to tiny, tiny wavelengths. So we try to gather as much of that as possible. So that's one of the energies that we have. And people don't really realize that, but electromagnetic energy, the stuff that comes and rings our phone, and we answer our cell phone, that's a wave that's floating through the air. It's energetic wave that's propagating through the air. Our brains are getting that energy, even though they probably don't interpret it, they still feel the effects of that. And the idea is that that could be inducing something in our brains. We don't know exactly what it's inducing, but let's measure it. And at the same time, let's figure out what these people are feeling and see if there's a correlation. So that's one of the big energies. Another energy is the sonic energy. So, the transverse waves, the things that go. So there's a lot of speculation that when there's a lot of energetic bodies flying through the air like UFOs or UAPs or something like that. You get a lot of what they call infrasound, very, very long, long sound waves that could affect your brain. And it's a well-known fact that when earthquakes happen, people start acting weird, animals start acting weird because that's creating these very, very long P waves that are traveling. So we have sensors that measure that kind of energy just to see what's going on. Then there's all sorts of energy that goes way up in the higher realm, which is the gamma rays or the X rays and the gamma rays, high, high energy. And we measure those because that can actually affect your psyche very, very predominantly, where you'd be going through your day and all of a sudden you would get hit by maybe a gamma ray from the sun or something like that, or from some collapsing star. And all of a sudden you get frightened, like, what the heck? It's your brain trying to process this invasion of energy, although it's not a dangerous energy, it still can make neurons fire, and your brain is trying to interpret that. Say, what the heck is that? and it might make you scared or it might make you tense or it give you that like that feeling of like what the hell? It's like somebody's watching me or something like that. So we're gathering that information as well. So these devices, although they didn't do this all along, from 2017, but now we're starting to get to the point where we're sensing all sorts of signals. Now there's other signals that people don't that are speculating in the quantum level. We know that quantum mechanical energies that are all around us could happen to induce some type of experience in our brains, could do things like entanglements. If we get entangled with somebody, all of a sudden something happens to them, we can then feel the effects of that. So we try to get as much of that type of energy in our systems as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of different types of things that can cause us to have experiences. And what we try to do is we try to record all of that simultaneously with a piece of equipment, either something they wear or something they have near them. But again, at the same time, we need to know what the people are thinking. Are they scared? Are they getting nosebleeds? Are they getting these like big headaches or something like that, or getting irritated or things like that? Because that's a big indicator of something that is different in their environment that's affecting them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And the one thing that comes to mind when you say quantum energies are even like affecting people,
Sure,
that's if you're talking physics here and we're talking about the bubbling of matter within our perception, that's somewhat energies that are existing within almost reference frames of existence that are beyond our perception. And would
that's
that be
correct.
okay? So is that why some people think that these beings or these influences may be interdimensional?
Well, it makes sense that they could be because people report that they see UFOs all the time. Okay, millions of things, but they've never really interacted with one. So I believe what we're seeing is maybe just a small piece of something that is really physically there next to us, but it because we can't see it. The electromagnetic spectrum, our eyes see a very, very narrow part of the electromagnetic spectrum, like going from red up to ultraviolet. Inside of there, that's what we can see. But there's a whole bunch of stuff. How do we know that there's not things that are right next to us that are way out in the spectrum? We don't know that. There are cameras that allow us to do that, but we also know that there's so many different dimensions out there that we exist in three or four of them actually, right? X, Y, Z, and time. Um, and how do we know that there's not more? How do we know that there's not something standing next to us in a different dimension that's communicating with us or affecting us, or they have the ability to reach out and touch our dimension? So, that's actually quite an interesting way of looking at it. When we look at our local space, our metric, our space time, we don't know what's affecting it. So we have sensors that actually look at that. So we have a gyroscopic sensor, we have a magnetic sensor, and a acceleration sensor that's highly dependent upon what our local metric is doing. So if we get a perturbation or a small change, and say a craft goes by, very energetic craft, it'll actually change the way our metric is surrounding us, and we'll get small changes in say the gyroscope or the magnetic vector or something like that,
And so
which is our
when we
gravity, basically.
100%. And so basically, one thing you made a point of just now was we have our X, Y, Z, and our T. And you could say that's how the human body itself is perceiving what we call space-time as an
Right.
emergent property. Um, so I find that super interesting. And you're saying that when a craft comes racing by, it may change that perception or the perceiving of
Yeah,
space-time.
it'll twist it, it'll squish it, it'll pull it apart. Just like when a spaceship goes past the moon. The reason that gravity pulls things into large objects is because it's changing the way, Einstein showed this, right? Changing the way the local gravity or the local metric is around it. So it's pulling things in. So it stands to reason that something very high energetic that goes past us is going to do that ever so slightly, but our brains are so sensitive and they can sense anything we get that feeling that there's something, something happened. We just can't put our fingers on it. It's like, you know, the birds use the magnetic field to migrate, and they use quantum mechanical sensors that they've evolved. So we have these quantum mechanical sensors in our brain. We can't interpret them. Maybe our subconscious can, but our outward brain really can't interpret them. We just know something's funky and that we have to, figure out what the heck's going on.
Yeah, and so when you speak on the twisting or the stretching or the crunching, I mean that as far as the human body's ability to perceive space-time and all of our tools, that would come across as some sort of red shift or a blue shift.
Yes, exactly right. That's
Okay.
exactly, but ever so slightly that it wouldn't really affect the way our eyes are interpreting it that we can perceive. But if you have, and that's why you have to have scientific instruments calibrated sitting next to you that are constantly looking at it. It says, oh, hey, by the way, you just had a twist. And I'll show you some twists. I mean, we recorded some pretty significant ones and recorded them at the same time that we actually found these people's narratives. Like they would come home that day and say, "Oh my God, I was just all of a sudden, it just felt really strange, like somebody was looking at me. I got really, really scared." And they entered that. Turns out, if I go back to their data and look at that, sure enough, there was a spike, in one of the channels, maybe the acceleration vector or maybe the electromagnetic vector or something that might have been responsible or could have been just a sneak peek at what was going on.
Yeah, just to break this down very quickly, basically you have these devices, the Mupas device, and it's picking up on all the different energetic fields that
Yep,
exist, but
that's
you're
correct.
also correlating that to the experiencer events, right? So the experiencer, the person with the device, is literally logging on to experiencer .org. Is it, what was the name of that website?
It's experiencestudies.org or dot com. Yeah.
Experiencerstudies.org, right?
Yep.
And so they log onto there, and without even seeing the data, they're saying, tonight I had this experience. And then you're able to go back, look at the data, and say, well, hey, there were spikes in certain fields that correlate directly to the time you wrote that you had an
That's right.
experience. And so one way I find this extremely valuable is for people that kind of feel that they're insane because they're having these experiences. But so now you have a tool that's out there on the market where people can basically say, hey, family, or hey, friends, the device is showing their spikes at the same exact moment I'm having these experiences. I'm not just making things up. This is actually happening.
Right.
So I think that could be a great tool for psychological studies and therapy. But at the same time, you have a few different devices. You've got one that's the tabletop. You have the Mupas Grande, is what I'm calling it. And then you have the Mupas Biometric.
That's right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and that's the one that I think will give great insight into the phenomenon. And that's because you're wearing it on your wrist and you're
Right.
walking around with it.
Yep. This is basically, it's a device that goes on your wrist. It communicates with your cell phone. It's recording pretty much, so it's recording your basically, how are you doing? Are you nervous? Are you scared? Looks at your blood pressure, looks at your heart rate, it looks at your twitching, it looks at all those indicators, and it looks at the environmental stuff. It says, there's crazy stuff going on in your environment as well. It looks at electromagnetic vector, it looks at, anything that's going on local to you. It doesn't have the same fidelity as the Mini. I can show you a picture of one. Doesn't have the same fidelity as the Mini, which is all of the gizmos, but it's much better. It's much better fidelity or accuracy, and able to pick up much smaller signals. That could be like you put that in your living room or where you spend your most time, like in your family room with your family or something like that.
But
And
the but
we
the
find is
bio
that what's that?
I was gonna say, but the biometric you wear on your wrist and
All the
it
time. You
keeps
go out to, yeah,
all the
go out.
time. Yeah.
Yep. And what's great is that if you get out of coverage, it doesn't really matter. It just stores it and stores it. And when it finds like a Wi-Fi or something like that, it'll upload it and stuff like that. But the important thing is that you're constantly narrating into this thing. Oh, I was driving down the road. I looked out my window. I saw a UAP. I took a picture of it. And all at the same time, I'm measuring all the electromagnetic energy to see if there's, a big spike in one of the channels.
Yep.
So, and that's something that's like people love that. I mean, they get the ability to do so I'm putting science in their hands because now they can do science on their own. Um, We bring in all that data. So what we do is that we take all of that data, and there's terabytes, there's so much data. And what we do is we create models with it. Everybody knows about this AI fascination in this country or this world right now. But so we use all those AI tools to get correlations and get patterns and understand when we see this, do we see this? And then we can start making not so much predictions, but we can make indications of whether or not people are actually seeing things and when they might be seeing things in the future and all those kind of stuff. So
Well, the Mupas itself, it's MUPAS, Modular Unidentified Phenomenon Alert System.
yes,
So in essence, it's an alert system as well.
it's so it, what you do is that it'll tell you when the correlations happen. You sign up to say, okay, well, I really want to know when I So normally we don't let people see the actual data and for like several weeks later, but we do send out alerts to say there was something funky going on. You reported that you saw something, and at the same time, we do send out these alerts. So it's an alert system, but I don't want to scare people to say, oh, run for the hills or get the hell out of the house. It's more giving you the comfort that we're sensing some type of correlations with signals that are coming from the outside and what you're telling us. To know that it's not just in your head. You're not just manufacturing this thing or hallucinating without any kind of catalyst or any kind of way of this happening. This is actually something that's created on the outside. Something might be trying to talk to you. And to get back into that whole thing is that why do you do this and giving these people comfort? The original study, which went from 2017 like 2020, was all about trying to understand what these signals are and are they inducing people to have it. But what we found out with these people is that they started relying on this. They would use this data to figure out how they're going to do, what's going on. Like if they went to an area and they did something that maybe wasn't great. Like they went hiking and they maybe chipped away at a crystal or something like that and brought a crystal home. And then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. They just, felt terrible. The device was going crazy. They saw a lot of, strange. They had bad dreams. The dogs were barking and everything. And then they would look at this thing and say, "Well, I'm bringing this thing back." So they would bring it back, and then everything would calm down a little bit. So we have so many instances like that, not exactly like that, but like that type of thing where they started relying on this thing and say, wait a minute, you shouldn't do that. This is just a piece of equipment that is meant for understanding what this phenomenon is. But, it's like human beings have a way of using their surroundings to make themselves feel better.
That's very cool. And so the original study in 2017 had, I believe, if I remember correctly, 35 devices involved
We
with it.
had 30, so we were funded for up to 50. We never got to the 50, but we put out there 35 or 36 actually. We swapped people in and out depending on, their involvement and things like that. But that went on, so that's why we had so much data. So those people created the initial data that taught us how to go to the next level. So now the phase two part of this thing, we're already up to almost 100. So we already blew that away. And what we found out statistically, although the information was great, I mean, we're not complaining about the information from these original people, but we felt that we need a better diversification in our demographics. And we might have been too pigeonholed on certain people in a certain way. So we wanted, and first of all, it was all in the United States. So that's a bad thing right there because there's so much other cool stuff happening all over the world. So the next phase is like, let's go worldwide. Let's increase our number. We're hoping to get up into the 10,000s total devices out there, recording data, recording people's thoughts, and all this stuff. So yeah, so we had originally that, a small group, but now we're expanding it out to many more people.
So the original study was basically 9 states. And I know you've continued to work with the technology since then, but now this current study, the current phase, you're looking to make almost a worldwide grid of these devices.
Worldwide grid, right, and be able to localize things. So what we found out, which is really cool, is that we could have two devices within, say, 3 or 4 miles of each other. They would then get pinged simultaneously, or just not simultaneously, but maybe a little offset. We had a situation in several, it happened like 4 or 5 times in Utah. There's a canyon in the Uinta Mountains that, in fact, Blind Frog Ranch is right on the end of it, where we had three devices that are kind of scattered, maybe about say 3 to 5 miles separation between them. We would get a cascade of events going from one to the next to the next, and then the people would still report one to the next to the next. So it was very apparent this is not something that's localized. This is more of a spatial type of thing where you might be having some problem, but somebody a mile away is feeling the effect of the same exact phenomena.
You know what that
So,
reminds me of is a Lagrange point. The
excuse
kind
me?
of a Lagrange point, I believe that's what they call it.
Oh,
Like
Lagrange,
where
yeah, sure. Yeah.
the
So,
gravitational field, but
yeah,
they
out
kind
in
of
the, yeah,
move as things orbit.
yeah.
So it might not be the right terminology, but instead of using Lagrange, you could call it a UFO hotspot. That's just basically traversing along the surface of the Earth or within
Well, yeah, so
space-time.
there's a lot of people speculate that, along on the Earth, there are what they call these ley lines.
Yep.
It's lines of energetic and basically lines where really weird stuff happens a lot, which is kind of, not a very scientific way of saying it, but it kind of boils it down to, are there places where things happen significantly? In Uinta Basin, there's a lot of crazy stuff that happens along certain lines. So, you know, ley lines are kind of tough to swallow, but it might be true. You don't know. But
Well,
we
I
have
mean, they
found
seem
correlations in, spatially, 2 or 3 mile apart and on a line.
and they seem to also be related to the construction of ancient megaliths,
Well,
right?
you think if it's been around, and that proves, right? It's been around for years, for
Yeah,
millennia. This is
yeah.
not something that's new that just happened because we happen to be, here. This has been going on for thousands of years. So if you were going to build some structure that represented places that you feel good and you wanted to worship, it would be places like we're used to being on now. So when we find monoliths and we find petroglyphs and all those things on rocks, well, that area is probably, you go there, you feel euphoric, all that kind of stuff. Well, let's go bury our gold there, or let's go like draw on the rocks there, 1,000 years ago. So it's not that
Maybe
surprising that there's a lot of monuments to this area that happens to be where people got these experiences.
well, I mean, I think that one of the most commonly known structure would be the Great Pyramids of Giza, right? The Giza Plateau. That I believe that's
Sure.
also on a ley line, one of those points. And from stories, I don't know because I didn't exist when they built the pyramids and all that kind of stuff. It was a way for the ancients to communicate, or for to help them communicate with, in quotes, the
I've heard that.
gods.
Yes. Very
Yep,
interesting.
yep. So
And
I find that super fascinating, and all those ley lines are related to, you could say, magnetic focal points. Would that be an accurate statement, or?
I think that there's some energetic fields there that we don't understand, but our brain seems to interpret it to some level. So, like I said, so if we can have a piece of equipment that augments our brain and could make more sense and categorize and log, then that's a total win for in the scientific sense. Then
Of
collecting that
course.
data makes for good statistics, let's say.
Yeah, and the idea behind this is to actually have a scientific foundation to the phenomenon, right? Because from my understanding, this might be the most and only like scientific study that I've ever seen, with so many experiencers and with such devices. Um,
I
so
believe
it,
so. I think there's been some false starts over the years, but I think that at this point, so you say, well, we started this thing off. We said we wanted to publish. In order to publish, you have to be at least 5 sigma. I mean, so that's kind of the golden rule to be 5 sigma, which means that you have to be super, super accurate. You have to have enough data, and that's why the numbers have to be so high. And that's why the requirement is that you really have to have calibrated equipment. You can't it can't be narrative. It can't be just somebody just spouting off, oh yeah, I saw a UFO. I mean, you have to have
Right.
real scientific data that you collect. It can't be anecdotal anymore.
I totally understand, and definitely agree with that as well. And did you want to go over some of the data that you have collected or to
Yeah,
show?
so I mean, from the first study, I don't have anything from this, but you have to share. Let me share. So you prove me to share.
Let's see here. You should be able to share. Does it not
Yep,
let
I
you
got it.
share yet?
Perfect.
Okay.
So this is from the first study. I don't want to show too much. The problem with this is that there's a lot of personal data that goes into this. And when you've got personal data, people, I promise, what we do is when we have a participant that comes in, we promise them, we make a very stern promise that everything is HIPAA. We don't release anything out there. If we do release anything, it's washed through AI so many times. It really is just a sentiment type of thing. But this is data that we got permission to show and everything you see here. So, like for instance, there's a thing right here that somebody posted um, around the time where this. Let me just explain what this thing is. This is the electromagnetic spectrum. This is a microwave radiation, actually. Normally, this goes like this. This low line here goes like this for all the time. Then all of a sudden, this large peak appeared at some time during the day. Simultaneously, they went to the portal or they came back later or and registered the time. Around the time they said, whatever the narrative was. So something happened. They had a strange feeling, and at the same time recorded a very large deviation in the electromagnetic spectrum. So something caused them to have an experience that we catalog we recorded not only their narratives but also in some changing of the electromagnetic spectrum that we were recording with the instruments. And then all of these red circles here are people reporting a lot of things we can't show you because it's personal data, but a lot of these things happen like this is the gyroscopic stuff. So, it's very possible something went by at this point. Normally, there's not a whole lot of deviation, but it just so happened that there was a big deviation this day. A lot of noise went by. So, very possibly something was in their neighborhood. Um, all of these types of things are very profound type of, let's see,
When you
a
say
couple other ones
gyroscopic
here.
data, is that kind of like fluctuations in the gravitational field, or what would be a good way of describing that?
So yeah, so the our metric, which is the surrounding, is extraordinarily flat and extraordinarily stiff, and it takes a lot of energy to change it. It's like if we looked out and we saw like some kind of a weird twisting of the metric, our eyes would interpret it as like we were getting dizzy and it was just like floating in front of us. And now, not to that extreme, but extremely small, these sensors can pick up tiny, tiny, tiny changes in the twisting and the pulling and the way that the metric around us is happening. So like if a large spacecraft, very, very large spacecraft zoomed by us, we would get a very small change in our local metric. And, our minds will probably sense it because our minds are very, very sensitive. But also these devices, the one that picks this up is a Siemens device, which is extremely accurate and it gives us some very interesting information. So like right here, there was a blip where you got this big deviation in the gyroscopic data. At the same time, somebody reported that, we had this dream or I felt scared or something like that. So all of these instances that we record here are also, we have a lot of other instances. Like we might have seen this blip a lot of times, but nobody reported anything at that point. So there was no correlation. The only time you get a correlation is when you have these, when we indicate. So we had over 600 of these tight correlations where we get these big deviations simultaneously with a narrative reported. But we probably
So
had thousands where there was no correlations that we couldn't actually enter into the data.
So as far as the gyroscopic, that more has to do with, you could say, a torsion within our perception of space-time.
That's right.
And then when it comes to the electromagnetic spectrum, you could say that's more of a redshift or blue shift.
Electromagnetic spectrum would actually create some type of energy that would, induce some, neurons to fire or something like that. And actually, to tell you the truth, the gyroscopic stuff would actually induce a neurons to fire because it's changing the way the neurons are propagating down our or the what they call the ions are propagating down our neurons and out our in the dendrites and things like that. So all of these things could potentially create a thought, a memory, a emotion or something like that. Very, very brief, but still sometimes pretty dramatic.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yep. So this is, like I said, this is just a small cross section. I mean, some of these things are like you couldn't explain this. I mean, this is something that's like so weird. We couldn't explain why the hell this electromagnetic. This is the microwave again. All of a sudden, the noise floor just bounced up and came right back down again. We couldn't understand why that happened, but people were having these problems at that point. So,
what was the duration of that microwave emission?
I can't really see it, but it's probably about 10 minutes.
Okay.
So something happened that caused them to have some type of brain functionality change. And then what we record in their environment, actually correlated with it.
I have a random question, but I gotta just ask when it comes to mine.
Should
Um, how would have you had these devices near anyone that's having, in quotes, a Kundalini experience of some sort?
some kind of, can you repeat that question?
Kundalini experience. That has to do with like a deep. Have you heard of that before? The Kundalini. It's like a deep meditative trance where essentially you can harmonize your delta through fast gamma brain harmonies.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. So, right. So a lot of people meditate and they go into trances and they do that, they self meditate or they do that to themselves. So they get into a situation. It turns out a lot of this stuff happens, and that was actually a weird question. So a lot of this stuff happens when they're in a meditative state. And the question is, why would the environmental stuff change when they're in this state? So they're reporting that there's, something going on. They don't really understand it, but they're in this state and they're feeling this stuff. Whether or not how the brain is manufacturing that, but we were also getting changes in the environment signals at the same time. So it's almost like when you go into those states, you either induce some other this entity to further communicate or further do things to you, or your brain is actually a sync for this. We don't know. I mean, so it's a very difficult thing, and that was one of the goals in this second version or this phase two is to understand that a lot better. Is it the people that are creating the sync that's bringing this in, or is it just this phenomena causing this in the brain to happen?
Again, I have the most random question or follow up to that. Ultimately, I think that would lead to the understanding that of free will and choice. And maybe that I'm taking that a little bit too far out there, but there's a relationship to personal choices, personal brain states, and you could say the nodes of manifesting matter or
Sure.
how they're reacting to the body itself. So if you ever wanted to truly scientifically prove free will and choice, this might be a way.
It absolutely could be. Yeah, I agree with 100%.
Yeah.
Um, So I have a lot of examples. It just, we had 600 of these things that happened. So that is very profound. One of the other, if you bear with me a little bit, so just to give you an idea of what it really looks like, if I could share again.
You should still be able to.
So this is the actual portal that people use. I don't know if you can see this or not.
Yep,
This
I
is
can
the
see it. You're
portal.
sharing. Yep.
So these are some of the devices in real time. I mean, this is like a device that's out there right now. In fact, let me just go to this is the one that's actually, so this is the real time data that's coming from, say, from a device. So you can see this guy is changing. So I can switch over to say, this stuff is kind of boring. The temperature doesn't really change that much. It doesn't, although we do environmental stuff, it doesn't really change that much, but sometimes we get, oh, actually, it's the pressure that we get, it's better. Um,
So just for people looking, you can actually pick which um, energies you want to
right.
display. Right.
So when the pressure does some, well, actually, this is kind of wacky. When the pressure does funky things, that's an indication that something is in the environment doing something. Um,
Is there a
and then,
relationship to pressure and infrasound?
so yeah, the pressure would be a reaction. So don't forget, the pressure is just the molecules, air molecules pushing, right? Pushing.
That's what I was getting at.
But
If you get a standing wave of infrasound coming back and forth, you get nodes
yes,
of low and high
yeah,
pressure.
the
Okay.
pressure could very well be something like that. So we do have do have an infrasound sensor, but the pressure always happens to be a very good indication. Temperature, not so much. Pressure, yeah, because pressure is measuring a force that is highly reliant on stuff that's in your environment. So we have that. And you can see it just sits there gladly all day long. It just, scans across your screen. Some of the devices out there have cameras. We have cameras on some of these things. So what the thought is that let's take in fact, it's daylight when this was taken. Let's take some, um, let's try to get the visual part of this thing coupled. So if people say, I saw a UFO or something like that, and then this switches over to infrared in the nighttime. And then we can go to, say, for
The,
instance,
the one with the cameras, that's the Mupas. I don't know if you have a
that's the
name
mini.
for.
Yeah, the mini, you could shove a camera in the back of it. The big one, like you called it, I call it the micro or the macro. It's the big one. That has a really big camera on it. So there's a lot of other things. So this is oh, actually this doesn't have a, let's see, I got a couple other ones that are like the sound and stuff like that. So this is sound. So when you get infrasound, it goes, and this will deviate pretty big. So when you do get some infrasound, this goes way up. This is just right now, very, very, this is basically just random
Baseline.
noise.
Yep.
What do I have here? So this is, oh, yeah, there it is. So this is an interesting device. This is one out in Blind Frog Ranch, actually.
Yeah, I was about to say site near Homestead, so that would be Blind Frog Ranch.
Yeah, so this is two devices that are at Blind Frog Ranch. Anyway, I'm not supposed to talk about that, but anyway, that's okay.
No one saw it.
Um, actually, so I spent, so actually it's an interesting story. So I was called by the Blind Frog people, and they said we're get some really weird stuff going on here. It was right in the Uinta Basin, so I mean, I'm not surprised. And they said, "Can you come out here, spend some time, and instrument and see what the hell's going on, so we can get some peace of mind?" Because things were going crazy. People were getting sick. People were having problems. Went out there, found some very strange things happening. They filmed it, and they said, "Would you mind if we put this on our show? Because I think people will be interested in seeing this." So I said, "Sure." So that's coming out probably in May timeframe. But there's a lot of interesting thing that happens in that area. And I got to tell you that there's a lot of interesting things that happen all over the place. It's not specifically in one area of the country. It happens all over the place. It just so happens that it might be a little bit more energetic in that area, or maybe there's a ley line there, or whatever the heck it is, that makes it happen a lot more. So
Well, it seems like the Uinta Basin has a lot of action.
I think so. I think so. But there's, like what I just want to, if you're listening to this, it says, well, I'm not in the Uinta Basin, but strange things happen. There's a lot of other places in the world that strange things happen. It just hasn't, it's not as popular.
Well, like Sedona, for example, is one, right? Sedona, Arizona.
Sedona's
Um,
amazing. There's
Mount
places.
Shasta
Yep.
in Washington. Like so,
Yep.
there's places all over, and
Yep.
they can be as small as right because the size of the phenomenal area of research can vary, right? Because you can
Yep.
have a very small magnetic hotspot. I'm just going to use the word magnetic very generally. It might not be the right word, or you could have a really big area.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And that's why it's important to have density. So you can have multiple devices in an area, to see if you get any gradients to see, okay, where is this thing? Is it moving? And do we have a flow from one device to another device, or is it going like hundreds of miles, and pinging all the devices as it goes along? So it's quite interesting.
Well, that's
If you don't,
where
I'm going
eventually
to
you could
share
even.
another. So we had some very interesting. So part of what we've been doing is instrumenting interesting places. So there's a place in New Hampshire that for years was looking and reporting strange phenomena happening. A lot of orbs going by, a lot of problem with the animals and the dogs, and the kids were acting funny. People were having bad dreams and things like that. And they basically came to me and said, I know you worked with Hal, and I know you worked with a lot of people. Is there any way you can help us through this to possibly instrument and let us understand what's going on? So what we did is we instrumented the property. And just to give you an idea, so this is a video of what the actual aircraft or the thing was that it was instrumenting. This is a it might it it's a lot of this is artifactual. So although it looks like three or four dots, it really wasn't. It's this is the way that the camera pixelates it. But this thing is cruising by. This is you could see it back here. This is snow because it was snowing that day. This is the thing that's going by over here. And then this one is a close-up of the thing in infrared. So oh, I'm sorry, this is infrared, and this is just your regular camera. And you can see it's got, very strange aberrations. It does some strange things. But when this happens, the instruments go crazy. And I'll show you what that looks like. So,
So can I just ask? Can you go back to those videos real quick? I want to ask a few questions.
shoot.
Um, so the visible light spectrum was the one on the far right. Is there any filter on that, or was that the actual color that
That's
was being?
actually came right out of the camera. I mean, this came right out of the camera. So
So that was
whatever.
visible light. That's a
But
visible
you have to remember,
orange.
some of these cameras have automatic gain control, so it's kind of funky. So when we put cameras on our systems, we take all that stuff out of there. We don't let it do that. But the sophistication of what they had here wasn't to the point where they can actually control a lot of that stuff. So a lot of this stuff is, although it's genuine, it's totally genuine. It's just not scientifically it's not done scientifically to the extent that we need it done. So that's why I volunteered to say, look, we'll bring some stuff to you. It was all iPhone and trail camera. But
So
we then,
that one on the far left is infrared, is what you were
so
saying?
this is trail camera. So this is infrared. And then
Okay.
this was, I think the one on the right is all iPhone. And this is all, I think this one and this one are iPhone.
And so you're saying the one on the far left, it wasn't actually four different orbs or four different lights. It was
No, I
one
think it's just
source,
pixelated.
and
Pretty
it
sure
was
it's just pixelated.
okay. So I think a lot of
But
people, with the just real quick, like the New Jersey drone flap, I feel like a lot of people just don't understand the cameras, or how cameras can distort things sometimes.
yep,
That's all I just wanted to throw in there real quick. I've spent a lot of time behind a telescope looking at stars and focusing, and
sure. Yeah.
yeah, okay. But
So
that's
this is the sensor that's out there now. So this is what we call the Mupas macro. So it's the big one. Can I zoom in? I guess I can zoom in. So it's got all sorts of sensors in it. It's got oh, there's an antenna that actually goes with this thing. It's an antenna that has the triangulation. So
yep.
it
It's got
looks
the
in
three different
three.
sensors on
It's
it.
got a camera up top. It's got a infrared camera up there as well. It looks for any gamma. It's got all sorts of measurements in here. So this is what we use to get the data.
Very good. And so, where is that location? Or are you allowed to disclose that location?
Yeah, so this is somebody's residence, and they don't want to tell you where they are.
Do you have any
So
overseas that you're able to disclose the location of?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Do you have any of the Mupas macro devices overseas, and you can disclose the location of it?
Not overseas. We were looking to put one in the Heselden area,
Yep.
the valley. We only have a mini there, so we don't have a full-blown one out there. So we're looking to do that. We would love to be able to do that. But so let me just review some of the interesting stuff that happened on this property, if you don't mind. If you want to take a look at this thing. So one night, so since this thing was installed, I think it was installed maybe in February, and this happened in March of last year. And there was a indication. So this something, so it was the trail camera picked something up, and then this is what was recorded on the Mupas device during that period. So if you go look at this thing that happened over a 4 hour period, so probably whatever it was that was flying around in this guy's yard came in and out. And basically what you would see, let's go up here to the gyroscopic. So normally the average gyroscopic for the month is on this dark red line. The bandwidth here, the dotted lines are where this thing goes wiggling back and forth all day long. So that's just a noise.
That's the
That day,
1.61 sigma or whatever you want to call
yeah, so this is just,
it.
the maximum minimum signal for that.
Yeah,
So this, and then, so normally if you look at any other day, it's just sitting here wiggling. This blue line would be wiggling along this red line between the dotted lines. But it just so happened that when this orb was visible in the camera, which is right here where this purple is, it had an escalation and it got bigger and bigger and bigger and then dropped off suddenly and went back, and it was all the noise went away. The magnometer, which measures the magnetic field for 30 days, the average was again this red line, and this normally is where the magnometer just wiggles back and forth. On this particular day, when the orb was visible in the camera, it escalated and it came up here. So those two were very strange. But what was really cool was the electromagnetic energy. So the electromagnetic energy again should be on this red line here and just wiggle between here. But as the day went on, from like 3 in the morning until probably in the afternoon, or actually it went almost for like a long time. Um,
very cool.
it
Very interesting.
escalated, and then when it showed up, it was at its maximum. And then again, like everything else, it just died out. But the
So real quick
gamma, so
on
the
that
gamma,
top.
I'm sorry, I
Go.
didn't.
Can you hear me? Okay. Or
Yeah, I can hear you. The
okay.
gamma is the green. The green energy is the one that was very suspicious. This is the gamma. So this is the high energy particles that are known to when things decay, you have radioactivity. This is so this indicated that there was a very large deviation. So right around when the orb was present, the gamma, which is the green line here, went very high. Normally, it's just this green line that came in and out that down here. But during that particular day or that particular time, it just went nutso and then went very, very high. So we consider this, and subsequently after this, there was about 4 or 5 instances like this where we had a correlation between what we saw in the camera and what we read in the instruments.
very interesting. So if I could just ask one quick question on this. Um, so gyroscopic Z would relate to your heights, your altitude on the planet, or is that correct?
No, gyroscopic is more the twisting. It's the twisting effect.
So the
So it's
twisting
like,
force of the Z direction
yeah,
increased.
so it's like maybe something high energy over here and low energy over here. So the whole metric kind of twisted a little bit.
So
And of course, this,
when it goes to the positive or the higher numbers, does that mean it had a clockwise twisting or counterclockwise twisting?
oh, you don't know. I don't know. I have no idea. That's a really good question. I don't know. That's a
Okay.
good question. It doesn't have, so it's basically along the Z-axis, but I don't know which way it's positive or negative, depending, I guess, if you put your thumb up towards the Z and this is positive, so it probably is
Right hand
twisting.
rule, right.
Yeah, it's twisting counterclockwise, I guess. That's a good question, though.
Yeah, no, I was just curious. I'm trying to like help break it down for the audience here. And the microwave energy spiking at the same time as the gamma energy spiking is also pretty interesting, right?
Yeah, so that was actually And so it's sometimes when you high energy objects. So maybe like say for instance, this dot right here is really a high energy orb. It's very possible it could be. When you get high energy concentrations in an area, you will get spontaneous decays of radioactive material in the dirt. Like if you have any radon. So anything, so if you go and you bring some high energy electromagnetic energy in the area, you'll increase the decay rates of radioactive material and you'll get more gamma rays. So usually when you get high energy electron or electromagnetic energy, and it can't just be like static stuff, it's got to be moving. So like really big peaks or like spikes of electromagnetic energy, you'll get a lot of gammas, and that's basically what we found to be true in a lot of cases,
And when you
just because
say,
of the way the these molecules work or these atoms work. Is that when you shake it up a little bit, you're going to get a higher, you're going to change the decay rates, and you'll get more decay, and then when you have a decay, you get gamma, right? You get all these reactionary particles that come off of this thing, like, all sorts of stuff. I don't want to get too
so,
crazy with it, but
I don't think we're going to lose too much of my audience, but maybe, we're getting a little too much into the weeds here. But I just wanted to say, when you're speaking high energy, you're referring to energy density.
energy density, that's correct.
Um,
It's
and
not
so
overall energy. It's very localized energy density that um, can be interpreted by your brain in a certain way.
Well, because energy density itself would have some type of gravitational effect, right? Because mass itself is a very, very high energy density. And so now when you have something from nothing all of a sudden turning to mass, it's
Yeah,
like almost as
absolutely.
if
Yeah.
you've just, and I'm not saying this is what you've discovered, but I'm saying like it's almost as if you've discovered like a black hole just forming above you, creating some type of energetic effects. It's not a black hole, I understand. Maybe it is, I don't know. But
Well, don't forget, it is to some extent. I mean, you have a very localized energy source that it might not be a black hole in that it has a,
the event horizons
yeah,
foreshadowing,
it doesn't have
yeah,
a
it's not there.
horizon, it doesn't have a singularity, but it's
Right.
super high energy. You don't know. But it's enough to cause environmental changes that can be measured and witnessed by a person.
Right.
Very, very small. I mean, we don't want to get anybody nervous, but when things like this happen, things happen to you. So I remember when I was doing my postdoc, I worked in the radiation oncology area. We would have people reporting strange phenomena happening when they were getting radiated because spurious gamma rays were going into their head and firing neurons. And they would say, "Oh, by the way, I felt like I was like in a party and people were around me eating pizza and stuff like that." But in effect, they weren't. Um, so gamma could cause that, but also electromagnetic energy can cause that. In fact, infrasound can cause that, the people hallucinate. So that's the things that we're trying to correlate is that stuff happening in the sensors and then stuff happening to the people at the same time. And then we know that we have a good data point.
And then the goal is to triangulate the sources of those energetic fields or disruptions, right? Like that's what the point of the Mupas
Trying to localize those.
macro
Right,
is, as the
right. If you
triangulation.
can, the thing is that if you're smart enough to predict, then you could figure out where it's coming from. So then you could localize it and figure out, okay, well, here's the instances I have in these devices and people reporting this. And if I could like figure out where it's actually emanating from, that's the key to this whole thing. And then
You
of
know,
course, can you modify whatever this thing is behavior? I mean, if it's actually changing things in our psyche, can we spin that around and change things in their psyche?
or can you also find relationships, like cyclical relationships, that this happens every year at this time, this
Yep.
event is,
Yep. What is
yeah.
your alpha waves doing? What is your delta waves? What are you doing at that time? That's why it's so important that we gather information from participants on a daily basis. They give their narratives and they actually report cool stuff. And then we take the natural learning stuff or natural language stuff and pull out all the pertinent information and make really cool correlations. And it actually is working out really nicely.
I think that might be one of the more challenging aspects of the phenomenon for people to understand is that every single person on this planet is somewhat of a point of attention, almost like you're like the focal point of a telescope. Every single human is a different focal point of a telescope, and these perturbations, because most people think of the world and the universe as being very materialistic, but our most advanced science says, hey, our matter is bubbling from this quantum soup, space-time is
Sure.
emergent. So every point of attention has a very specific perception of space-time based off of, you could say, relative motions within a higher dimension. I don't know. But so I think that that's one of the greatest challenges for materialistic minds to understand and truly grasp this is how would a high energy density floating above my head, alter my perception of space-time? And so I mean, you have a PhD in this field, like I might have a master's, but there's got to be a way to explain it, or a way to help the average person that has never studied these fields like truly get into it. And I think this might actually be one of those stepping stones. At the most, it's great for scientific researchers because they have no baseline to even start working with this
Yeah.
information.
Yeah. They're kind of
Yeah,
lost when it comes to it's all anecdotal information that they're
right,
used to. And that, and the people say, well, why hasn't the government come and stepped in and done this? Because they have all these sightings, because all the sightings are anecdotal. They don't have any scientific data that they
right.
pulled out. They do have some stuff from aircraft, but most of what they have, 99.99% of what they have is all anecdotal stuff that they got from social media or whatever. So what we're trying to do is really pin things down, understand exactly what's going on, and make people part of the scientific solution.
Yeah, and I think this is great for Earth-based study, right? Meaning from surface on the Earth, great-based study as far as like an initial way to start understanding what needs to be detected, how can that correlate, how can that relate. But once you start having a really good database of correlations to user experiences, you could probably, and you might already be there, this might be phase three that I'm touching on, is create a global system of satellites that are also looking for these types of energies.
Sure.
Once you truly like know, hey, we need to look at this gamma wavelength, we need to look at these gyroscopic data. Now let's make this global grid in space, and so that's like phase three. Yeah,
Yeah, the important thing I think is to get N up there, which is N means the number of devices out there. So, if we could put a watch on every single person, that would be amazing, but that's not going to happen. So we would say, look, 10,000 is a goal, probably need a lot more, and we need the whole world. We can't just say, oh, the United States or Utah, or it's the whole world that
it
gets affected
reminds me
by
it
this.
reminds me of seismic, not maybe not the seismic data, tidal buoys. You have the buoys in the ocean that are measuring the heights
Sure.
of the waves.
Yeah,
So you could even incorporate these onto those buoys in the middle of the ocean because half the world is an ocean. So you
that's
also need
true.
to
Yeah, we're missing all that
incorporate that as
information.
well.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, no, I think it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, that's why I support the device. That's why if you want to get one, you can find it on my website. You can also find it on Dr. Jim Segala's website. I believe Carl also has them, Carl the Crusher.
Carl.
Uh,
Yep. He's got a big following that he gets it out to their people. He's got his own system out there that his own group of people that are involved in this. So we're getting a
yep.
lot of people coming in. It's amazing.
You'll be at 10,000 units within no time.
I hope so. I think that, and then the good data will start coming out, and I think we'll start seeing some really good results. And I just want to make sure you understand that we're not selling this data. We're turning it into scientific data that could be put and published. Either well, it will be scientific journal papers to send it out to the rest of the community. Data would be shared, not everybody's data. We would get rid of all the personal stuff and just give them basically data that they can then use to further investigate and do statistics on and studies on and things like that, and the rest of the scientific community. So we're hoping to fuel some really cool, clever people to come along and start looking at the data and getting some interesting phenomena or results.
If I remember correctly, one of the last times we spoke, you mentioned on experiencerstudies.org that there would be potentially a group chat or some type of
Well,
community.
no, the whole thing stems around that. So you can share your information with other people. You can say, well, I want this person to look at my data because what happens, and it was very strange. The first way we did this, or the first time we actually ran this study, we were letting people like look at each other and talk to each other, and they can chat between them. We were finding out that their signals seemed to be correlating. In other words, when somebody, there's thousands of miles in between these people, but it looks like they were starting to sync up a little bit, where they would have an experience around the same time other people would have it, and very similar experiences. So they could be entangled in some way or something like that. So the system is designed for people to come in here as a community, talk to each other, look at each other's data. So I would give you permission to look at my data, comment on my data, and do that, and talk back and forth. Just like almost a social media within a social, within the system. But that's where the cool stuff comes from. That's what do you think of this? And then people would say, oh, well, this is what I think this is going on. And then you can use that information to further enhance the model.
I mean, and how would that relate to coherent thought forms? I'm sure you, or maybe you haven't, but heard of like the idea of 10,000 people or a certain number of people meditate on a certain topic that it's
Yep, they
more
can
likely to,
actually, yep. No, I
so
think
that,
that's exactly right. I think that if you get enough people to focus in on something, then you have a lot of energy that you can then focus on something and make some changes. What I'm hoping happens is that somebody could actually from halfway around the world could focus on somebody else's device and change it and
it's, yeah.
and do something. And that's kind of what one of the studies that actually is going on right now that is available to be able to go in and look at somebody's device and kind of intent on it and do some stuff with it. And it's like it's very difficult to pull that out, but if you get 10,000 people doing that, now that's amazing because now that's good statistics.
Well, I mean, even just for example, say, do you have a Mupas at your place right now? Like where you are?
Yeah.
So I have one at my place. And
Yep.
basically, we could both go and say, hey, did our Mupasses align in any way during this conversation?
Yep.
That's just like basically what you're speaking on.
Basically, yeah, but it's like a focus thing where I would pick a random part, I would pick a random device, a random person that I don't know anything about, and focus on them and see if I can get their device to change. And I
Okay.
think that kind of, and then the other way around, have two people that's been communicating for 6 months and they've, worked back and forth, have them do that in a way, but have one not really know what's going on. And you have to do a lot of blind study type of things to make sure you're not biasing the data, but there's a lot of cool ways of doing that.
Yeah, that's the most challenging, I think, would be to make sure that the data is not becoming biased based off of your own
Right.
wants, your own
That's why we
moments.
delay,
How
yeah, we delay people. So if when people sign up, they can either sign up to have real-time stuff where, they can see their stuff right away, or delayed, meaning that they don't get the actual waveforms until like 2 weeks later. That way they can't be influenced and their data is not representative of what they're seeing. So that's the stuff that we actually put into the model.
And so one question or concern that has come to me a couple times now is who gets to see the data? Because people they want to have these devices, but they're scared that the data is going to be sold to the government, right?
Yeah,
Like
so
it's I know it's a very general term, the government, things like that. People are nervous about being monitored, right? Already to begin
right.
with. Like so,
So
but you
right
don't
now, nobody on the planet physically looks at the data. Everything is done through the models. So all of the stuff gets fed through, all the stuff gets fed through into the AI model, the natural language learning models and things like that. And all the data gets pulled out of that, goes into the database. Everything filters up to the clouds, and the clouds all HIPAA compliant and never leaves the clouds raw. It only leaves the cloud once it's been like pared down many, many times. Like what you just saw, what I just saw for an example, would never leave the site. It'd only be like at 10 o'clock on this day, there was a spike, and that's the only data that would ever leave. So there's a lot of data protection because when people do this, we want to induce people to actually make really profound, honest narratives about what's going on. And the only way you can do that is to protect them and say, no one's going to see it. And no human being's going to see it, but we're going to have these AI models trained off of it. And they're going to look at that and say, okay, well, all right, now when this person did this and this, this happened to this, and then it just gets smarter and smarter and smarter.
Yeah, and so basically, what the point that I want to just like kind of pound in right now is basically your personal data, like your name, your address, like that's not being sold. It's more general data is being collected and models are being created, is what it seems like it's coming down to.
Exactly right. Right.
Yeah.
It's just like when Facebook gathers data when you're on Facebook. Facebook is constantly pulling data out. Nobody actually looks at it. They shove, and you can't. There's billions and billions of transactions. They shove it into their models and they make their models smarter so they can make predictions and do all sorts of fancy stuff. So, I mean, that's basically the way the world works.
Yeah, no, and that's great. Do you have any other thing you'd like to add?
Oh, I think
If
we
not,
covered a lot of ground here. I would encourage people to read up about it. There's a lot of information that's available on this type of stuff. Look at some of the ways that the data's been used. I published everything, so if you want, I can put. If you don't mind, I'm going to put the website in the chat. And I have an educational thing tab where I have all this stuff, and a lot of the stuff that I showed you today is all there. And I have a lot of documents that I've put up there that explained like Havana syndrome, hitchhiker syndrome, all those kind of things.
I
So
mean,
if
just
somebody
to
wants to
speak
get
on that real
involved in
quick,
this, I would suggest they go there first and start reading about it. And it gets fascinating
it
because,
does, especially when you start
yeah,
correlating those. Maybe this is for another day, another topic, but like Havana syndrome, also the idea of psychotronic
yeah.
instrumentation, right?
Yep. And then National Academy of Science looked at it, and National Academy of Science is like a really profound or renowned agency. They looked at it and said, yep, in fact, people are getting hit with electromagnetic energy and it's affecting them. It's inducing this phenomena that they have. They're hallucinating, they're having earaches, they're all these things. So that actually article is on that site. I suggest people just glance over that.
It's the Havana syndrome article, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
They don't call it Havana syndrome anymore. I forgot what they call it now, but it started out with Havana syndrome because it happened at the consulate in Havana.
Yes. Yeah.
That
But
was
now
the
that we
first.
have,
And then now there's hundreds and hundreds of cases in the US and around the world.
again, that might be a podcast for another day, but that does really lead into like the psychotronic
Yeah.
warfare, which,
Yep.
yeah. Um, yeah. Is there anything else you want to cover, or should we
No, I
just
think
kind
that we covered a lot of ground, and I encourage anybody that wants has questions, reach out,
of
and
sounds good?
be
Yeah. If
glad
anyone
to
has any
answer them.
questions, reach out to Dr. Jim Segala. You can find your contact information at experiencerstudies.org. Is that correct?
Yep. It's
Um,
.com. Yep. Experiential studies. It's experientialstudies.com.
So experiencerstudies.com. If you want to purchase the device or get one, you can get them at experiencerstudies.com as well as luciuslabs.com and also through Carl the
Yeah, I
Questioner.
think it goes for your side. I think that you could represent a lot of people that would come in and share through your because you have a lot of people that are of a certain demographic and they, get that community going, share information, talk to each other. Um, if you can group things together like your neighbor and stuff like that, you can start seeing how things matriculate through the your neighborhood and things like that. I think this is the way it's gonna start um, getting to answers.
it also leads into eventually the transferage of thought forms. Say someone comes up with a genuine idea, how does that genuine idea transfer through different groups of people, through different organizations? How does like a thought seed humanity? I, I know that might be a little,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, you get what I'm saying, but I think that could also
Yeah.
potentially come from
Very
it.
interesting.
Yeah.
So, all
All right.
righty.
Thank you everybody for joining. I hope you learned something today. If you're interested, check out the Mupas device. It's at experienceyourstudies.com or luciuslabs.com, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.